All right.
How was the rectory?
Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
He's a,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
he's a terrific host and
Yeah. Oh, I know.
the place it's up
I
there
know.
in Tumpy. I slept great.
Yeah.
You know, the heat on yet, but
Oh,
I,
yeah.
I
Oh, I
can
know.
live with
I
that.
know. No, that'll keep us all moving, you know?
Bill, you were the first guy that set this up,
Yes.
but then you're no longer involved. Remember, I
No, it
wrote-
was Phil. It was Phil that was involved.
And
and-
no, not anymore.
No. So
So it
they
was
turned
Bill
it back
handing
to
me
me.
over to
Yeah.
Bill, not
Yeah.
Bill handing me over
Yeah.
to
Well,
Bill.
it was Bill to Phil to Bill.
Bill to Phil. Oh,
Yeah. So that makes sense, right? I'm the one that sold you to this group. I said, if you want to have somebody that'll come and fire us up, shoot, you know? Okay, everybody, welcome. Welcome to our annual assembly here at St. Susanna's. Not a better place in the world to have this, even though those of us from Springfield who travel here would say it's an opportunity for us to work on our prayer lives getting here. So we've done that, and we're just delighted to. I'm delighted to have the honor in a minute or two of introducing Brother Mickey. But I thought I'd ask Pastor Steve to come up and say a couple of words and welcome us to this beautiful facility. And boy, are you thinking about joining the Diocese of Springfield? I'd like to talk to you about that later. Okay. I think you might have to turn that on.
Welcome, everybody. Nice to have you back again. Nice to see you this year. I don't have anything to say, so enjoy this day. It's for lunchtime. I think you all know where the restrooms are, the ladies' room, the men's room there. But like at lunchtime, it's a beautiful day outside. The back door there is open. You can sit out in the resurrection garden or sit up by the fire pit or stay inside, anything you want to do. But just make use of anything you like this day. Enjoy this day. Looking forward to it.
All right, great. Okay, yeah, I think we're going to ask Craig Simpson. Where is Craig? Oh, he's right here. Okay, we're going to ask Craig Simpson to come up and offer a land acknowledgement. Craig is the, I don't know the official title, but the chair of the Mass Catholics for Indigenous Rights, and they do wonderful work. And there's not a better person, I think, to do a land acknowledgement than our friend Craig.
Let me find on my phone. I thought I would look more younger if I found it on my phone. Okay. Oh, wouldn't you know it would take forever? Okay. No internet.
Okay.
Well, forget that. No internet. It all always fails in the end. Thank you for inviting me to do this. Let's see, I'll do it off of my head once again. We're honored to be on this land that was settled by Wampanoag, Nipmuc, Massachusetts tribes. Surrounding us are the Narragassetts, the Mohegan, the Wabanaki in Maine, and Abenaki and Abenaki. There's the Pawtucket, the Huckanuxet, and many smaller bands that have existed on this land for thousands of years. And we support, they still live here, and we support Catholics in all dissolving the doctrine of discovery, working for the removal of mascots in the state of Massachusetts, native mascots. We work to form a commission for education of Native youth. We want to honor the heritage and these are various bills before, 5 bills before the Massachusetts legislature. And we we honor their continued work in this area and supporting climate change and taking care of water and the earth. So please be cognizant that they're still here, and many over the last few years have come forward, new tribes, Herring Pond, and others. So thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Appreciate it. I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker, who's going to keep us entertained until 3 o'clock today. Oh, yes. Yep.
Sorry.
Yes, sir.
There's a logistical issue that we have here, and we'd just like to remind everyone. We have a number of folks on the audience in their remote, and we can't hear if someone in the audience blurts out a question. They cannot hear it at home. Frankly, I can barely hear it. I have hearing issues. I think many of us do. But what we'll ask is that anyone with a question, please step up to this mic. I know it's a little unusual, but please come up to the mic so that everyone in the hall can hear the question and everyone at home can hear the question. So we'd appreciate that very much, and thank you. That was it.
Thank you. Phil.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. This is my fourth experience with Brother Mickey. We came to see you in Boston years ago, and that was very exciting. And this past year, you've been twice to my parish in Springfield, and that's certainly one was a Care Creation event that we had last October, or the end of last September, and then we had you during Lent, and that was really quite the
my favorite season.
Yeah. That was really quite the experience. I told Brother Mickey this morning that one of my favorite magazines, and I'm sure for many of you here, is Commonweal. And the latest edition of Commonweal, they had a little ad for the Marinist Award, which is given at the University of Dayton, I believe. And it's kind of a list of the rock stars of Catholic theology listed there. And the 2023 winner of the Marinist Award was this young man, you know? And that was just kind of, I just smiled and I kind of said to myself, I have a chance to see him again and interact with him again. Actually, Rocco did an unbelievable job with the flyer for this event. And I'm just going to share what was on the flyer. In his own words, Brother Mickey says, I paint, write, and tell stories, and then travel all over the place telling the stories behind what I paint and write. That's kind of it in a nutshell. He began as a teacher of art in schools and colleges, and in 1994 moved to full-time artist, leading retreats, creating books, and giving presentations. He intends to share more fully the deep connections between art and faith, and more importantly, hope and joy. So, boy, that's a big agenda for the day.
I'll tell you.
But we're so delighted to have you here, and good luck. And I know you're going to wow them as you always
Oh,
do.
thank you. Thank you very much. Whenever I get these glowing introductions, I always say, talk to my sisters. My two sisters, they'll always come up and tell me, if one more person comes, oh, you're Brother Mickey's sister, how wonderful. And they said, we're going to tell them the real story of what you're really like. So you all know how that goes. But I'm delighted to be here and I've been looking forward to this occasion. And today, the little days, no King's Rally. I'm sure all of us would be at one if we weren't here. But we're doing equally important stuff, as I hope you'll feel when we see. But I'm starting us off with three good images. I'm an oblate of St. Francis de Sales. And we have a parish down in Virginia. I've had it for a million years. And every year they have a big event open to the whole diocese. So it's like 800, 900 people come to this thing. And I'm always invited to advertise it. And these are the last three themes, so taken from the writings of St. Francis de Sales. The one last year was called Bend, Don't Break. And that was his thing. He said, don't get bent over. I mean, don't break in half over fear and all the anxiety that we have. He said, the only thing worse for the human soul than sin is anxiety. And he said, we get ourselves all balled up. So his whole thing was take a deep breath and relax just kind of remember God's here in every present moment. The presence of God is I've done it myself while speaking, so don't worry about it. And then on the end is another one of his quotes, do everything through love, not fear. And that is more timely than ever, because everything that's going wrong in our country, and I guess you've heard there's one or two things, that it's based on fear. People are afraid. They're afraid of change. They're afraid of, and we have the compounded issue of being in church, which is so divided, more divided than I ever known in my lifetime. But that's not what we're going to concentrate on today. We're going to concentrate on how to deal with those things creatively. So we're starting off with a cartoon that was in the New Yorker. And one day you can see the glasses of wine on the porch. Looks like Cape Cod, right? And the guy is saying to his wife, I can't believe that the summer and civilization are almost over. And don't we always have that moment in September, with school starting, and it's like, oh, where did the summer go? And as we get older, at least I'll speak for myself, time goes even, we're halfway out of October already. It's like, how did this happen? Teilhard de Chardin said, creation has never stopped. The world is constantly emerging. And one of the great quote I read, did you ever hear the book called The Artist's Way? It was real big back in the 90s, huge hit. Julia Cameron was the woman who wrote it. And she wrote in there, and I've always loved this quote, she said, it's true when God closes one door, he opens another. It's the hallway in between that'll kill you. And I think that's so true because we're in the hallway. Every 500 years in church history, there's been a major epic event of a shift in belief and practice and all that. And we are over 500 years now from the Reformation, which was the last big time that people were as divided and split as we are today. The Protestant Reformation was up in the, anyhow, it was a huge hot mess. But here we are. And I always love to think that Pope Francis, early on in his papacy, went to Sweden to stand alongside a woman Lutheran bishop to celebrate the 500th anniversary of the birth of Lutheranism. So I thought, we have come a long way, and there's the things we need to concentrate on. And then about a month after that, he went to London to be with the Archbishop of Canterbury to celebrate the anniversary of the Church of England, So all that stuff that disrupted everything 500 years ago, those pieces have come together, So we're in that hallway. 500 years before that's when Rome split from the Byzantine Church, the Eastern Church. And Rome became the center of Catholicism, no longer Istanbul, So, and we survived that. It got to the next level. The problem with today is things are happening so much quicker, and we know it so much faster. And because of technology and AI, which we're going to look at, we don't know what's true anymore and what isn't, right? So it just compounds our anxieties. But Teilhard, boy, he was up against it, wasn't he? He was not allowed to publish anything. The Jesuits came on him because of saying that evolution is a real thing. Do you know how many people still believe that today, that evolution is wrong? Hoax, woke hoax, because it's just like Genesis said, that doesn't make sense scientifically, or in any way for that matter. And so the Jesuits told him he couldn't publish. But as a Jesuit pointed out to me once, I was sharing that at a talk, and not knowing the guy sitting there was a Jesuit. He came up after, he said, I just want you to know. He said, we told him he couldn't publish, but we didn't stop him from writing. So he continued to write. And he died in 1955. And his first books weren't published till 1964. It took that long to get them, edited and whatnot. And he wisely left them all to his sister so that the Jesuits didn't have control of them. So now they praise him, he's one of their big saintly figures. Elia Delio said this broken, anxious world is oozing with God. Do you know Ilya? She's a Franciscan sister, teaches at Villanova. And she's a big proponent of Teilhard and cosmic spirituality, and has a fabulous website and deep writing. Was very blessed to present with her down in Camden, where I live, Camden, New Jersey. And I went over to Villanova to meet with her to plan it ahead of time at lunch. And she said at one point, I know my books can be a little dense. I almost choked. I said, a little dense. I have to read a paragraph 4 times. And even then I'm wondering, do I understand? Am I getting this? And she's delightful and is not a presenter that's dense, and a great sense of humor. I just love her. But this is in one of her recent books. I thought we could all read this as our opening prayer, even though I've already started talking. A prayer Pope Leo said just a couple weeks ago. Jesus, can you see it from where you are? Okay. Jesus, Lord of our history, faithful companion and living presence, you who never tire of coming to meet us, here we are in need of your peace. We live in times of fear and division. Sometimes we act as if we were alone, building walls that separate us from one another, forgetting we are brothers and sisters. Send us your Spirit to rekindle in us the desire to understand one another, to listen, to live together with respect and compassion. Make us builders of bridges, able to overcome borders and ideologies, able to see others through the eyes of the heart. Help us create space where hope can flourish, where diversity is not threat, but a richness that makes us more human. Isn't that beautiful? Beautiful prayer. So Pope Leo gives me great hope, as did Pope Francis. We're moving along in this slow-moving church of ours, right? We'll get there together, but that's why we're all here today. And I hope none of you are editors and noticed all the mistakes I made in there. And I thought I corrected them. I think I must have corrected the wrong copy of it. Francis de Sales, he was Bishop of Geneva, Switzerland, lived and grew up in the most beautiful part of France in the French Alps, in a town called Annecy, right on the lake. And he became bishop, but Catholics were not allowed in the city of Geneva in his day. The successor to Calvin forbade Catholics. Nothing was allowed, anything to do with fun, music, dancing was forbidden in the city. But he used to sneak in disguises to meet with people quietly. And he also met with the head of the Calvinist church, Theodore de Beza was his name. And not to convert him, but just to sit in dialogue. And de Beza said afterwards he was the most intelligent and gentlemanly saint he had ever met. But that was Francis's approach. Meet, find the common ground beneath our differences on the surface. And so I love that story, but this is a different one. One day he walked into his office, and there was his valet over by his desk with pen and paper out. And St. Francis said, what are you doing over there? And the guy finally confessed that he had fallen in love with a young widow, and he was writing a letter to woo her. And St. Francis went over and said, let me read that letter. And he read it, and it was like, you ain't getting anywhere with this letter. He said, step aside. And he sat down and wrote the guy a love letter to give to this widow. And he said, copy what I've written word for word. He said, but make sure you write your own name on there. And so he did. And a year later, they were married in the cathedral, and St. Francis married them. And that's what I love. That's how Francis de Sales rolled. He didn't freak out over the guy. What are you doing? Going through my things? How can I help you here? And he helped the guy enter. And I love this other quote of his. Only 2 kinds of people should go to communion, the perfect and the imperfect. And here we are at a time where too many people are more interested in who shouldn't be going to communion instead of who should, which is what Jesus did. And then at the Last Supper, Peter, I'm not giving it to you till you get that marriage annulled. Andrew, I always thought you were a little gay, so I can't give you this. He didn't say that to any of the apostles. He said afterwards, he sat on the floor and washed their feet and said, do with everybody what I've just done here, But we've built up such walls. And that's what religion in general is over. You know, a lot of people say it's getting over. I said, I think it's over already. It just hasn't hit all the crowds yet. But all religions, I'm not just picking on the Catholic. I love my Catholicism. I love it passionately, or I wouldn't be here as a brother talking to you today. But there are a lot of it that it doesn't make sense anymore in the year 2025. You know, the clericalism, the hierarchical stuff, the emphasis on laws and rules and regulations. We don't have time for that anymore, you know. We got to see we're all in this together. So, and I think that's what Vatican II was all about, and it was supposed to be about. I will remember you upon my couch, and through the night watches I will meditate on you. You are my help, and in the shadow of your wings I shout for joy. I love the Psalms. And I always read them fresh at each stage in life, right? Don't you? That's how you know the Holy Spirit's at work, when you read or see something familiar, and it's like, I never saw it that way before, or I never thought of it that way. That's the Holy Spirit working inside you, you know? And so when all that inspired this picture, I remember you on my couch. And I thought, that's a couch today. When whoever the psalm writer was 3,000 years ago didn't have a couch with headphones so he could listen to music, you know? But it's kind of like the timelessness of what that means. And I was inspired by the word couch to do that picture. And Francis de Sales said, inspiration is God's activity inside of us. So when you have those sudden sparks of inspiration. I just put this one in last night. And it's a picture of, did you see 1,000 people had a Eucharistic procession to the facility where ICE is holding people in Chicago that they've taken off the streets. One of whom was a man who had just found out his little 5-year-old child had brain cancer. So they have taken that father from his child and put him in a facility. And so there was a march, a procession, Eucharistic procession. They went to have mass and distribute communion to the mostly Hispanic and Catholic prisoners that and they were denied access. And that's what we see here, the ICE agent or whoever telling you can't go in there with that. So since this is No King's Day, I wanted to show, this is the last one I went to in June, and the guy in the green shirt's a Franciscan priest, and the 3 women are Sisters of St. Joseph from Philly. And so we were there, and Clarissa, the one in red, texted me the other day, I heard you're not going to be. She said, we're going to miss you at the No Kings rally this year. I thought, well, I'm doing something equally good. And I'm glad a lot of people that probably would have been here today were there. But I love the signs. Some of them were just so creative. Many were funny as hell. But I love this one. Do you remember Taco? I guess they were calling, I don't remember now what that stands for, Trump, Taco. What was it? That's what it is. So I just look at that, some lady dressed their dog up as a taco there. Francis de Sales said, ignore the barking of the dogs and keep going. Because he himself got death threats in his day. A lot of people didn't like his approach to this post-Reformation, world Catholic Reformation era that he lived in. One of my favorite writers, and I forgot the book, otherwise I would have opened with a prayer from it. Stephen Charleston, he's a Choctaw Indian and an Episcopal bishop in Oklahoma. Wrote these incredible books showing the commonality between all of us, you know? And he does a lot with bringing Christianity and native spirituality. So I was so glad to hear Craig talking about the native people here. Whatever our politics, whatever our religion, whatever our culture, we are all in the darkness together. Do not be afraid of change. Change will come and go, but what you feel when you close your eyes in prayer will outlast even the stars above you. So Pope Leo, as soon as I think a day after his election, I thought I got to get started on my Pope Leo picture. So there he is with St. Augustine and Pope Leo XIII behind him. And above is a quote from Leo XIII, peace is built on the foundation of justice. And Leo XIII was an important figure, as we all know, I'm sure, with Rerum Novarum and addressing the drastic changes in the world. Here we are, timed with every 500 years, right? That the Industrial Revolution began, right? And it got us to the mess we're today. And the technological revolution is why Leo XIV chose the name Leo, because he's kind of the symbol of How's he going to lead us into this next era in history? On the right is love, with Augustine saying, love is the beauty of the soul. And I have him in Villanova merch on his stole. And I sent it to Villanova, but I haven't heard from him yet. I can't do anything with it without permission. Speaking of, please don't people watching this on video steal any of my artwork or post it on social media. Anyhow, letter to the Romans, all creation is growing in labor pains even until now. We ourselves are groaning, aren't we? Right? We're in labor pains again, in that hallway in between. But one of my favorite quotes from Pope Francis is the one on the right. Early on, in the first couple months of his papacy, he went to Florence and addressed a crowd of 1,000 lay people from all over Italy. They were all lay ministers in their parishes. And he said a number of things to them, but it said, this is your church now. You know, it's time to elevate the laity and women and all that, all these things that were pretty remarkable coming from the Pope. But this was my favorite quote that stood out. He said, today we are not living in an era of change, but in a change of era. And that's exactly what the quote was all about. We're living in this time of everything. Nothing is left, especially if any of you are teachers or were teachers. You know, education world is over as we always knew it. Kids are learning differently now. You know, they're like this. And they get access by AI, you know, how to write papers. High school teachers tell me they have sessions for faculty to help them detect when a kid has turned in an AI-driven paper. And they even have programs that the kids do. Write me a paper on such and such, but make it like a B and put some mistakes in there so that it looks like I really, and it does it. That's change of era time. So there's the Holy Spirit stirring the waters on the left, but within us. And St. Paul's letter to the Romans shows us that he lived in such times as ours too. Do not conform yourselves to this age. Be transformed by the renewal of your mind. John the 23rd is my great hero who started Vatican II, of course. And he totally had it in his, was not even thinking of it. He took his meditation walk one day and he said he was just struck. The Holy Spirit said, we need an ecumenical council after World War II, you know, that the world was just a mess and rebuilding and everything was changed. And we're still feeling the effects of that today, you know, of what the world was like in the late 50s when he came up with this idea. So we went to Cardinal Ottaviani, who was the cardinal who would be in charge of it. And he said, I have this idea for an ecumenical council. And he said, so you're going to have to be the one that alert all the bishops from around the world that they have to come to Rome. And this guy hated the idea. And he said, we couldn't possibly do that by 1963. And Pope John said to him, good, then we'll do it in 1962. And that's when it opened in the fall of 1962. And Ottaviani later said, I hope I die before this council's over because I want to die Catholic. So anyhow, who said Pentecost, he's the one that rescued the Holy Spirit. Up until you remember, those of you who are my age or older, that it was the Holy Ghost before. Nobody knew what the Holy Ghost was, you know. It's like you threw it in there when you said your prayers, but you didn't know what it meant. And it just seemed like something nuns and priests and brothers had to, you know, I didn't have to worry about that. He said the Holy Spirit's in all people, not even just Catholics, you know, but the Spirit fills all life. So he said, may Christ inflame our desires to strengthen the bonds of love, to break through barriers that divide us, to pardon those who have done wrong, and to learn to understand one another. He wrote, in 1962, he wrote that. And he said, it's time for a new Pentecost so that we all recognize what the Holy Spirit is coming alive in us. Tradition means protect the fire, not preserve the ashes. Isn't that beautiful? So wise. And shortly after he was elected, he overheard two women behind him, one saying to the other, God, he's really fat. And he turned around and said, Madam, the papal elections are not a beauty contest. Thomas Merton was not having a good day when he wrote the one on the left. The whole world is in turmoil, spiritually, morally, and socially. We are sitting on a thin crust above an immense lake of molten lava that is stirring and ready to erupt. And on the right, he said, where has it gone, the sense of the sacred, this awareness of the holy? What has happened to us? In the early 60s, he got it. You know, that's what saints and prophets are about. They catch the pulse generations before everybody else does, you know. Dorothy Day was Vatican II, and a woman yet, 2 generations before anybody officially in the church was even mentioned the word Vatican II. She was already living out that being Catholic means just as interested in social justice as it is in making sure you get the Mass on Sunday and Eucharistic adoration, things which she loved. You know, I'm not knocking that. It's just that she said, that's not enough. We got to do more. And that's how the Catholic Worker came about. And my new hero, I always liked him, but lately I'm doing his quotes more than ever, Oscar Romero, because I'm, especially now, because the very people that we're punishing on this side of the immigration, this is where they started in his homeland, Mexico and Guatemala, El Salvador. He said, let us trust that the difficult moments will pass soon and that from them we can learn a great deal about life. And on the right, the triumph of what is not right is not a lasting triumph. I just did that one the other week. And I was writing the word triumph. This is how I do all this, that people always ask that. I start with the word that means the most to me, and then I have no idea what something's going to look like when it's finished. A lot of artists need it all sketched out exactly, and I don't roll that way. I'm like, you know, I'm going to start with the letter I like the best and go from there. But as I was writing the word triumph, I thought, ooh, without the I and the H at the end, it spells Trump. So I thought I got to play, so I made it orange, a lot of orange colors in there. I'm bad. One day at Mass, I was dozing off as usual or mind wandering, and the woman was reading the responsorial psalm. I misheard it. I said, did she just say, text me, oh God, and know my thoughts? Was really test me, oh God. But as soon as I got out of Mass, I went to my room, and I thought I got to make a picture of that. So I went to look like a medieval manuscript. So God's cell phone is up top on the right, connecting to mine with that vine. And I just thought, it's got to look like it's from the Book of Kells, right? So that's... And on the right, Joan Chittister. In the modern world, we're more interested in the technological than the spiritual. And that's one of the big sources of mess. And that's thinking is what inspired this picture here. Jesus and the miracle of the loaves and fishes. He's holding up the fish and the baskets of bread. And look, everybody's on their phones, not even paying attention. And I thought, how much help, isn't that real, you know? People are on their, especially younger people. Oh my God, the young priest I live with, great guy, but he's constantly checking his phone and you know, and watching TV or whatever we're doing. He's always, and that's just the young people thing, you know, and a lot of old people too. But you know, it's just this obsession with the phone, and it's depersonalizing, you know. Pope Francis said, don't forget there's another human being on the other side of that screen. And I just love that quote. I don't think I made a picture of it yet, but I love that quote. So we're missing the miracles in life with all our attention on that. So I travel a lot, and I spend a lot of time in airports. And for years, what I've been doing is sketching. I love to get to airport early. You know, some people, the last possible minute. You never know these days what kind of delays are going to be. I'd rather sit there and be comfortable and have breakfast, whatever, you know, and relax. And I have a sketchbook with me. So I sketch. I've been to 1 million airports, and here's a couple of them. That's Philly Airport on the left, my home airport. At when, right, there are 2 different sketches. The one on the right, I have pen and ink on paper in my sketchbook. And if I don't have that, I sketch on my iPad. So the one on the left is, I did on my iPad. Well, I'm sitting there waiting, and if they say there's a delay, it's like, oh, good, I had time to finish my drawing now, you know. Other airports. But notice the people in line in the middle there, even in line, nobody can have a moment of contemplation anymore, or just being present to the moment. You know, we always have to be distracted. So I started putting quotes with them. These are all pen and ink, watercolors. But I put the quotes from Francis de Sales. What we need is a cup of understanding, a barrel of love, and an ocean of patience. And on the right, this was a picture I did in the Omaha airport coming home from Mary Knoll runs trips every year to study, to dive into Native American spirituality. And I went to the first one. And we went 1,300 miles in 6 days across South Dakota. We went to Wounded Knee. We had this incredible guide. And at the airport on the way home, I looked across and there was 4 people were actually sitting there. And it struck me first, the 4 different races, and the ages. It's an older guy on the left. Notice what he's doing? Reading a book with real paper. And the young people are all on their phones doing whatever, But she's Asian, white girl, black kid. I just love the coming together. And the 4 windows, when I came time to paint it, represent the 4 times of day, because the number 4 is sacred in Lakota spirituality and the medicine wheels that they create. You see them all over. And the symbols of not only the 4 directions, north, south, east, and west, but the 4 stages of life that we go through, and the 4 seasons, that so many things in life happen in 4s. And so I just thought these 4 people are there, and the windows. So I painted, sunrise, daytime, sunset, and nighttime on the right. Worry prevents us from doing well the very things about which we worry. It is good when a soul loves solitude. It's a sign that it takes delight in God. And don't you, as I get older, I've always loved solitude, that's the artist in me, but I crave it anymore. Silence. I drove up here yesterday, I didn't have the radio on once. I didn't put music on. I just love silence because I don't get enough of it at home. It's like, I'm going to take advantage of having this silence. I don't get on the phone and talk. I did talk to one person on the phone, but back when I was just starting out the trip, because I knew as I got higher up, I didn't want to ruin it with that kind of distraction. And that's where we can finally hear the Holy Spirit. We need silence to do that, not constant activity and running to and fro. And I always point out that baby, I started sketching it, and her mother and aunt, I don't know who it was, but the guy in the back is on his cell phone, and the mother and sister stepped away. By the time I got to sketching that, I thought, I'm not going to put them in, I'm just putting the baby in. But the cell phone was really there on the table. So it's kind of like, even at that little age, and as I tell folks now, the mother went into the bar on the right to escape the craziness of it. That really wasn't the case, but. Never be in a hurry. Do everything quietly and in calm spirit. Do not lose your inner peace for anything whatsoever. To change the world, we must change ourselves. So St. Francis of Assisi is, of course, one of the greatest saints in all history, the most popular interreligious faith. Even non-Christian Eastern faiths love Francis of Assisi. And I just read yesterday that the Vatican has set up near the Vatican libraries, an Islamic prayer room for scholars who are Muslim to go in, pray while they're doing research in the Vatican archives. Isn't that something? And last week, I don't think I put it in today, but I took a picture of it. They set up a whole room for a Hindu group. They decorated with wildflowers and colors, and to celebrate. It's at the room of interfaith dialogue. And I thought, right there at the Vatican. And these are the things that are happening that give me hope. It's like, it's happening. We don't hear about it a lot when we just look at our American news. But saints are both courageous and creative. So whoever's doing all these things in Rome is being very, very creative and courageous. On the right side, have the courage to swim against the tide. That's a Pope Francis quote. Now, you all know Saint Thecla. She was one of the early saints in the church. And she was noted for, she was, according to her story, which was obliterated in about the 6th or 7th century, but she was supposedly converted by St. Paul himself. and went on preaching the gospel, which is why they did away with her story later. A woman can go off and do that. She's not named a deacon, but they said she did the deacon work. So the church wanted to kind of like erase her memory, so they stopped talking about her. But anyhow, she was going all around the Middle East preaching the gospel. And at one point she was taken captive, and it was during a time of Christian persecution. And they put her in the Colosseum, or an arena somewhere, where lions were in there. Thousands of people watching this. It was a great sporting event to devour the Christians that were in the center. And what happened in her case, instead of devouring her, the female lions went up and surrounded her and escorted her safely out of the arena. Isn't that wild? So that's why back in the day they thought, oh, we don't want anybody knowing that story. But she's enjoying a new surge of popularity. And the lion at the bottom is Jesus, the lamb of the lion, the great lion. She continued her preaching all over and was martyred eventually. I don't know where or when. I don't remember those details. But here's another Stephen Charleston prayer. Let your love be your strength. When you feel called to stand for what you believe, take up love as your witness. Let love be your strength, and you can stand before lions and never fear. So the one on the left there, I did it last year, I guess, 2 years ago, I don't know. And it's called Woke Saints. I thought, you're going to tell me woke is a bad thing? It seems to me that's what the gospel's all about, right? Being woke. It's, so I thought I'm going to show some saints that exemplify that. So that's Francis de Sales and my other BFF in heaven, Saint Therese of Lisieux. And with Thea Bowman is underneath Saint Francis, and Nicholas Black Elk is underneath Saint Therese. And beneath them are Dorothy Day and Augustus Tolton, who's venerable now. He's up to that stage. The other three are servants of God, first stage. And Augustus Tolton in the 1880s applied wanted to decide he wanted to be a priest. His mother had escaped from slavery with him. She crossed the Mississippi River in a rowboat with her two little boys and her infant daughter in the middle of the night. Can you imagine? And so, and he said later that's what got him interested. And he said it was her faith. She was Catholic. But, you know, back in the day, Catholics who had slaves by church, I guess it was unwritten church law or practice, had to have their slaves baptized Catholic. And then the slaves weren't allowed in the church with them. They, you know, they had to sit out in the carriage to take Mass to home again after Mass was over on Sunday. But that's how many, all the Southern bishops had slaves, all of them. The Jesuits had slaves all over the place. A lot of religious orders did. We didn't. That's because we were founded after slavery was over. But but in any event, so Augustus Tolton comes along and he wants to be a saint. And 17 seminaries in the United States, not one would take him because he was black. And so he studied in Rome instead. And now he's on his way to sainthood. And the horror stories after that, the institutional church and all that in America. So that's why he's in the picture. And on the right is Saint Phoebe, the patron of the women's diaconate movement. She was a deacon and is labeled that by St. Paul himself. Please welcome Phoebe, our deacon. So slow, right? 2,000 years ago, and we're still just giving her attention now. On the left here, you have Jesus. If you believe, you will see the glory of God. And there he is, raising Lazarus from the dead. You can see two little butterflies on the corpse while his sisters, Mary and Martha, are crying rather, excuse me. Well, I don't know if you heard, I run trips every year. I call them art and faith tours. This past year we went to New Mexico, but usually it's Europe. And this trip particularly was across southern France, across Provence. And we even visited where the hospital where Van Gogh painted Starry Night, and ended up in Montserrat where St. Ignatius had his conversion at the feet of the Black Madonna that's still there today. An incredible trip, every step of it. So I did this as ahead of time and had it made into a card and gave them to everybody on the first day. And in there, there's Our Lady of Montserrat at the top of the group. Next in line is Henri Matisse, my favorite modern artist, and he did a chapel for the Dominican sisters. On the right is, Vincent van Gogh and Henri Matisse. And up front are Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. According to French tradition, after Jesus ascended to heaven, they thought Mary of Bethany and Mary of Magdalene were the same person back in the day. But they decided they wanted to do exactly what Jesus said, go out and tell the good news to the whole world. So Lazarus and Mary and Martha and a crew of other people got in a boat, and somewhere along the line, the sail came down, and they prayed to the Holy Spirit, wherever this boat lands is where you're going to want us to be. And it landed on the southern shore of Gaul, which is now France. And there's a town to this day called the town of the Two Maries, where the boat landed. It's right next to Cannes, where they have the film festival every year. So anyhow, story has it, Lazarus ended up in, I think, Marseille, where he became the first bishop of Marseille. And Mary Magdalene went her way, and Martha went hers. And I want to show you where they went. Martha came across a town. She was preaching the gospel everywhere she went. And she came across a town that was being terrorized by a notorious dragon named Terese in Gallic mythology, Taresc. And instead of stabbing it, like we've all seen pictures of St. Michael, and he has the spear going into the serpent, or St. George, slaying the dragon. That's the manly approach. St. Martha took the more feminine, gentler approach. And instead of trying to kill it, she said, I'm going to tell you about Jesus. And she preached the gospel to the dragon and told them how Jesus raised her brother from the dead. And it calmed the dragon down. And they went into town, and the people didn't know it had been calmed down, and they killed it. And she was so upset. She said, turned out to be all right. Why did you kill him? So in remorse, they named their town Tarascon after him. And to this day, on her feast day in the summer, they have parades and floats and they really do up the dragon. There's carvings of the dragon and all that, because that's where Christianity was born, in that town. And it's just a fabulous, they have a basilica there that supposedly has the skull of St. Martha in there. But there she is teaching. So we went there, and a friend of mine who's Quaker, her name's Martha. So all day on the bus, I said, now we have to fuss over Martha. This is her feast day and blah, blah, blah. So we get home from the trip, and she said, could I have your permission to have a tattoo made from your image of St. Martha? I thought that was the coolest thing I ever heard. I thought, sure, because if this doesn't work out, I can get into the tattoo business, right? Holy tattoos. I already have a name for it. But in any event, so she sent me a picture, and her tattoo guy couldn't do she wanted Martha in there too, but he said, I can just do so she had the dragon tattooed around her wrist there. And Mary Magdalene went this way. She spent according to this tradition, spent the last 7 years of her life living in a cave on the top of a mountain. And this is the view from the opening of that cave. And we climbed and climbed and climbed. And I didn't think I was going to make it. A lot of our people had to stay on the bus down. We had walkers and wheelies and all kinds of things in my crowds. But when I get to the top, I thought, oh, finally we're here. And I look around the bend, and there's 100 more steps to go. I can't do this. But we get to the top, and there was a young Dominican priest standing there who, in his habit, and he had just been ordained, and he was going to say Mass for us. That cave is now a lovely chapel. And he said, I'd like to remind you that going on pilgrimage doesn't mean inflicting pain on yourself. And I thought, I didn't see you climbing up the hill, pal, just now, In fact, they pointed out the Land Rover that he drives up in every day, so don't tell us. But anyhow, that's him saying Mass. And you look one way at the altar, and then out there into the landscape of Provence. It was just an amazing spot. But my point in sharing it today is that's how Mary Magdalene went. It's a contemplative side that she went to. Martha went to the active preaching side. Mary Magdalene spent her last years on the contemplative side, which is what we do as we age. And supposedly, according to the story, the local bishop came the night before she died to give her communion. And that's all happened in this little cave here. It's a beautiful story. Don't let the truth get in the way of a good story, as the Irish say, right? So this is the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and beyond that fountain is the top step of the famous Rocky Steps, That statue is now at the base of the museum. It is the second most visited tourist site in Philadelphia. After the Liberty Bell. Everybody wants to see. Now, nobody goes into the damn museum, of course, but it doesn't matter. If we went there right now, you'd see a busload of people standing there like this in front of that statue. And so many of them are young. It's like, I guess that movie's old now. But in any event, when Pope Francis came to Philly, I sketched him doing the Rocky thing on the top step of the museum. And that's a quote of his from his talk in Philly. Have the courage to be happy. Don't let yourselves be torn, dragged down by all the things that are happening in our world. And the reason I'm showing this is inside the museum. I've loved it ever since I was a little kid. My dad used to take me there because he knew I wasn't the type of kid to take to a football game or a baseball game. He knew I loved the art museum. That was my thing. And so we would go there. And there's a painting in there, the upper left there, the left side, from the Renaissance of Mary Magdalene preaching. And I remember my dad saying that's what she did. They believed that she preached the gospel. She went all over preaching back in the day when this was painted in the Renaissance. So she's the patron saint of preachers. As I always say, ain't that ironic? In a church where a man is, or where women can preach, and a man is the patron saint of childbirth. So figure. So if you don't laugh, you cry, right? So anyhow, she's the patron saint of preachers. And that's why St. Dominic, who founded the Dominicans, the order of preachers, that they're dedicated to St. Mary Magdalene because of her preaching. I never knew any of this growing up, did you? They always paint her as this prostitute, and that's it. Never says in Scripture that's what she was. Anyhow, so that's my copy. I was sketching the painting one day. This was right as COVID was the first day that people were like coming out again. And anyhow, I was sketching the painting, and I looked down. There was a little girl. She was maybe 3 years old, looking up at me. And I said, "Oh, would you like to draw too?" And she went like this. And she said, "My daddy can draw too." And I turned around, and there was her daddy with another baby in one of those things, or whatever harnesses. And I said, "Oh, that's great." I said, "When I was little like you, my dad used to take me to the museum. That's great. Your dad's taking you here today." And she went running off, said goodbye, and off they went. But I finished my sketch, and I went outside, and I was sketching. It was that first day. The feeling of, and it was a gorgeous spring day, and the first time people were out picnicking and whatnot, right on the area right behind the Philly Art Museum. It's a beautiful spot. And there's a bridal party in the distance, having their pictures taken. The little kids playing Frisbee and grandparents at the folding table. And it was just this magical life is happening again after 2 years of being shut down. And as I sketched, I realized I'm standing between two trees, just like Mary Magdalene was doing in that painting. And I thought, she's still here preaching today. And we got to listen, All these stories aren't over. They're always evolving, as Teilhard de Chardin tells us. Always evolving. There's always something new to learn. So here's Mary Magdalene at the tomb on the left side. And on the right, she's bringing a bouquet of flowers, all of which, I don't want to take too much time to tell you the symbol. Oh, it's 10 o'clock. Anyhow, they're all symbols of Mary Magdalene from the Middle Ages, because she was so popular. So at 12, 3, 6, and 9 o'clock are forget-me-nots. And that memory of her going to the tomb and, I don't want Jesus to forget me, and, that moment. That mustn't forget that Jesus is alive and well. Then there's carnations at the next ones in line. And carnations were symbols of tokens of love. Did they do it up here in the Boston area? I know down in Philly, on Mother's Day, when you went to Mass on Sunday Mass, you got either a pink or a white carnation for your lapel. Pink was if she was alive, right? And white was if she was dead. But anyhow, that's where the custom started. I never knew that. And then the next ones are, impatience. And they go crazy in the summer. Then they're shade flowers. They don't need sun, and by the end of summer, impatiens are beautiful all over. So they're associated with her as well, impatiens. Inside the circle are lilies, because they're the first flower that comes up in spring, at least in France, I guess. I don't know. And then lilies of the valley, the little ones. But back in the day, they were called Eve's tears, because they believed that Eve, when she realized that she was responsible for bringing all of eternity into all people in eternity into original sin, because she picked that apple off the tree. But so Eve, wherever she cried in remorse, those flowers grew up out of the ground. So because they're droopy, sad little petals. So they were called Eve's tears, and they're connected with Mary Magdalene for that reason. And then in the center is Jesus, the white rose. And around it, hard to see, is a crown of thorns to symbolize that we all have our crowns of thorns to bear, and that they come with the beauty, thorns come with the roses. And we just got to learn in life to accept that. Maybe not like it, but accept it. At night there are tears, but joy comes with dawn. That's from Psalm 30. So there's Jesus as a Mexican farm worker. And when you can see the wounds in his hands. And and on the right are the three women at the tomb. And inside the tomb is the cosmos, that's where we head after death and where Jesus is now. Well, he's in here. And these are the Christmas cards from last year. I have some on the back table when you get back there. Pack of 10. But anyhow, I love this. It's called Three Wise Men and Three Wise Women. And it's the wise men at Nativity at the top, and the three wise women at the tomb on Easter morning. So it's the birth and death of Jesus, and all of humanity's part of that. Pope Francis said, I think of the strength of the women in the gospel following the death of Jesus. They were not paralyzed by the tragedy, nor did they flee. For love of the Master, they went to the tomb to anoint him. So Francis of Assisi, what I always say, I just gave a talk the other night at the Franciscan St. John Newman. It's a Franciscan Sisters of Philadelphia place. And I shared this image because we've turned him into a bird bath. Or the little thing where your kids bring their pets, which is wonderful. I'm not knocking that. But we've got to see him as radically important to the history and development of Christianity and the Catholic faith specifically. He was more than just nice to animals. He is exactly what Laudato Si is about in this 10th anniversary of Laudato Si. It's seeing God's presence in creation, not just a nice little thing, gave us flowers to feel good about ourselves. We're meant to be stewards of creation, right? And also to say that we have prayer lives that are part of creation. That's where we encounter God the best. So he didn't want to build big fancy churches. I'm sure he was spinning in his grave when they started building the beautiful basilica in Assisi, where his tomb is, and all the incredible frescoes. That was not up to his style or interest at all. So what we see in this picture, here he is with a woman and a black guy, and they're praying outside in amidst the creation. And notice the Pope going down the river in the background, just to say that this is a whole new reality and experience of faith and the practice of faith. And we've totally diminished it by now in turning them into this little bird bath that, it's so much deeper than that. And that's why we're at a phase as our creation stories develop, and it's not a woke hoax. It makes me sick to my stomach when they just said it the other day. That's all woke hoax, all this nature stuff. Did you see that, Carl, that things were predicted, I don't know how many years ago, that 8 things were going to happen first once we reach the point of no return in climate change. And they've happened. The first one has happened with coral. Around the world, 80% of the world's coral is bleached by the warm water. And it's all white. There's no more beautiful orange and pink and brightly colored coral anywhere. The coral reefs off Australia are white, and they ain't coming back. And it's not a woke hoax, And it's so unchristian to say that. So I love this quote. Brian Doyle, did you ever hear him? He's dead now. He died at the age of 60, I think. But he was the editor of Portland Magazine. And his books of essays are amazing. But he said this in one of them: there are two Catholic churches, one a noun, the other a verb, one a corporation, and the other a wild idea held in the hearts of millions of people who are utterly disinterested in authority and power and rules and regulations, and very interested indeed in finding ways to walk through the bruises of life with grace and humility. And that's what I think that wraps up so much of where we are, that tension, the division in our church, where some people just want, it's comfortable, isn't it, to just do as you're told, obey the rules and regulations, you'll go to heaven, and if you don't, you're going to hell. God is much more mature than that, you know. Greg Boyle said, God could care less about your behavior. We don't have time for that in this crazy world. Worrying whether you got the Mass last Sunday. A lot of Catholics today think, as long as I hate abortion and gay people, then I'm good to go. I can do whatever the hell else I want. And just do as I'm told, because they don't have to think. They don't have to apply their own personalities to things, often which are very unhealed, you know. People suffer trauma and can't. I have one of my dearest friends and mentors in the whole world. She's 83 now. She suffered horrific sexual abuse when she was a little girl. And last year she had to go in the hospital for something, and a nurse came in the middle of the night and triggered a PTSD episode because it was nighttime and the doorknob of her room clicked. So the doctor next day said, we're putting your name on the list. So if you have to come in again, it's important that you only have a woman doctor looking at you in the middle of the night. But Karen is so evolved and so precious. She's deeply spiritual. She's a spiritual director now for others. And that's what she's doing with her trauma, is using it to help others heal. But she told me years ago, she said that her marriage broke up over, all kinds of issues, side issues that developed over the years. But she struggled for years praying the Our Father. She said, I just could not think of God as the Father because her own father image was so unhealthy. And she can do it now. She's deeply passionate and in a healthy way with Christianity. But it's her brokenness that has helped her heal into wholeness so that she can help others. And that's what we're all called to do for each other, you know? Not to remain unhealed, but to heal ourselves so that we can help others do the same. This is my Aunt Mary, very, very close to her. She died back in 2017. But that's me she's holding in the middle picture in the old days. All my siblings and I, we adored her. And I just want to share, because she's probably the biggest inspiration of why I'm a brother today still. Guided by the Spirit, Mary left her high school teaching ministry in the 80s to become a hospital chaplain when the AIDS crisis hit. She later wrote, many people tell me of their pain and sleepless nights, and I can't give them the medicine that will bring them relief. Others tell me of their discordant homes and broken hearts, and I can't restore harmony to them. And I hear a lot of confessions, but can't celebrate the sacrament of penance with them. Actually, I can't do much for patients at all, but I can be for them and with them, and many times that makes a difference in their lives. Isn't that beautiful? That so profoundly tells me what our ministry is about, what Pax Christi is about, what No Kings rallies are about. Just reminding ourselves that we're not alone, you know? God doesn't judge. All that stuff's got to go. Grow up. I'm always telling people, grow up. If you're still praying like you did in 6th grade, you need a little kick in your pants or the prayer pants. Bishop Gumbleton, he's part of the reason we're here today. He's the one that kind of made Pax Christi so widely loved in the United States. And I was commissioned this past summer to create this image of him that was turned into postcards that they distributed at the national, I was not there for it, at the national conference. But that's he chose as his bishop's motto, be doers of the word and transform the world. That was his when he became, and he's like the first Vatican II bishop in the United States. And he saw on his stole the symbols of all the things. He was so involved in the peace movement, and he went to Haiti, he went to Iraq and Iran, and he went to the troubled spots and everywhere. And that's what's all embroidered on him. He's wearing it all. And on the right are two quotes of his. God has been remaking me, and he's not finished with the job. And the other, you're not trying to convert every person, you're trying to transform the world. And there's a big difference there, isn't it? So last year, right around this time, I was allowed to go to the synod for 45 minutes to sketch. Well, I was so blown away. It was just awesome. I went up and at the appointed time, and then we were placed in this long hallway with the glass, like you'd see at a football game where the media is. And there was all these reporters and journalists from around the world with big fancy cameras, and me with my little sketchbook. And the woman said, okay, you're here now, so you can stay 45 minutes, but we're going to be real tight about time. It has to be that. So I had a 1 minute of panic. Like, where do I start? I'm looking down at all these people down there. But I just started in half hour. I had this one done. And you can see Pope Francis kind of dead center of the picture there. And he was sitting next to that Orthodox hierarch guy, patriarch, whatever they call him. And he was a big guy, and he had that big black hat, and that I kept like having to go like this, get out of the way, so I can see Pope Francis. And then preaching was Cardinal Timothy Radcliffe, who the Pope had just announced he was going to name a cardinal, an English, British, Dominican guy. And so I just started, and what was so memorable to me, I couldn't really pay attention to his words. He's a renowned preacher. Because I was, concentrating on what I was doing, but I was noticing how many women were down there. And not all of them were in religious habits, regular women, and men in suits and ties, not clerical attire. And I thought, it's happening, We just got to be patient in the church because things take but once the horse is out of the barn, it ain't going back in, And so the synodal church, it's not taking root in the United States yet, everywhere, but it's out there, and it's what the Holy Spirit wanted. It's what John the 23rd started setting up back in the Vatican II days, that this idea that we all should have a voice. So these are the places I get my hope, and we don't hear about it enough. So I finished this. This was the little thing we were sitting in, and that woman that you see with the camera on the right, she's the one who came around. She was very nice, very polite. She said, okay, you got to go, pack up all your stuff, and let's get out of here. So outside of not knowing what the hell was going on down there. It was a very memorable experience. And one of the things I loved, I always wanted to see the sculpture. You've all seen pictures, right, of the Paul VI Audience Hall that was made in 1970, and they commissioned a sculpture, and that was opened on Pope Paul VI's 80th birthday in 1975. And it's Jesus rising, it's called Resurrection, Jesus rising from the rubble of a nuclear holocaust. And that, of course, in the 70s, there was that nuclear threat, war threat. All that was so alive as it is again, I guess. But it's to show Jesus is eternal. And it's not just any old rubble. It's the rubble of the Garden of Gethsemane. Because he said that's the last place on earth that Jesus prayed. And so this is showing that Jesus is bigger than our nuclear fears and holocausts. So I had been teaching about that back in my teaching days, and I was kind of more excited to see it than the pictures I took off the internet there. Pope Leo, of course, he wasn't Pope yet at that point. But what I loved more than being in the Synod itself, when I left, you've all seen, if maybe you've been there, that the St. Peter's Square with the colonnade of arches, pillars. And that was designed by Lorenzo Bernini, Gian Lorenzo Bernini, in 1650. And the idea was that the arms of Mother Church reaching out and gathering her children to her breast. And what I love today, after seeing the modern sculpture in there, different interpretation, was there's homeless people living on the left side of those colonnades, thanks to Pope Francis. And they provide tents for them to live in. And they're not there during the day when all the tourists are there, but it's filled up with them at night. And they have Pope Francis set up barbers that come once a week, medical advisors, doctors who come and offer their advice. And he had showers installed nearby for the homeless people. And that's what struck me when I saw them. I got out, I went back the next day to sketch some more, all the homeless folks hanging out there in the columns. And I thought, this is the universal church. And I'm looking at what I look at my home in Camden when I look out the window. Homeless people sitting in the side and walking by. And I thought, this really is the universal. It gave me a whole new sense of what the synod was about. And we're all in this together, you know. Ignore the barking of the dogs, like Francis de Sales said. You know, just keep doing your thing in your way. Be who you are and be that perfectly well. So there was a big rosary walk at night, that Saturday night. And I took that picture of how beautiful the Vatican is at nighttime, lit up. The star was, it was a full moon or close to it. And 1,000 people showed up to pray the rosary. And everybody was given a candle. And they processed. I stood in one spot and sketched, but they processed in big circles around St. Peter's, and each decade was a different language. I don't remember what the first ones were because I was drawing, but the fifth one was an Irish lady, so I thought, oh, English, finally, I understand. I knew they were praying the Hail Mary, of course, but anyhow, I did these sketches, and I even saw a Franciscan friar there, and I thought, oh, St. Francis is here, you know, a little reminder. And I noticed outside that one homeless person's tent was a guitar. And I thought, beauty saves us. Dorothy Day firmly believed, that was her favorite quote from Dostoevsky, in the end, beauty will save the world. We'll look at that in a little, we're going to look at her in a little bit. But, and I thought that's what that guitar sitting there, it's still that human impulse to sing, to hear music in the midst of the mess of life. So that's a guy, a homeless friend in Camden, comes by once in a while and for a cup of coffee. One day he was sobbing, snot, everything coming out, and he said, I'm not here to ask you for money. He said, I just want somebody to listen to me. And I thought, that's all this is about. That's how we build hope in the world. We're all in this together, you know? And so I love this quote from St. Therese, grace so transforms our vision that we see beauty in what the world sees as straw. And me now, and my deepest vocation is to be a witness to the glimpses of God I've been allowed to catch. And since I've lived in Camden for 16 years, I have entirely different glimpses of God than I ever did. It's not just beautiful mountaintops and the ocean and rivers and wonderful people that are easy to be with. It's this side of life. That's where it's harder to see beauty, but it's there, you know. And St. Francis said, all I can give God is a tiny scrap of goodwill from the most hidden place of my poor heart. So we have in the front lawn of our house of the rectory, I live at the cathedral of the Diocese of Camden, right, if you're familiar with the area, right near the Benjamin Franklin Bridge that connects to downtown Philly. And we have a statue of Mary in the front yard. And as long as I've been there, she was vandalized before. I moved there 16 years ago. And her fingers are gone. Her nose was vandalized and chopped off. And you can see it cracked right across her neck. I guess they tried to decapitate her, but must have stopped or something. So I kind of like the fact that that's there. I think of her as Our Lady of Camden. In all her brokenness, she's still there, right? That's how Jesus and Mary roll, right? So in fact, one day I was tending to I came home and there was a woman passed out on our kitchen steps. I called to get Frank. He was inside. We were two of us, the priest I lived with at the time. We were supposed to go out to dinner. And I said, Frank, I'm running late. I'm home, but I can't get in the door because there's a woman passed out on the front of the kitchen steps here. And he said, okay, I'll wait. So I called the ambulance. They were there in no time. And wonderful with her bag was open and they found a pill bottle that was empty. And they said, this is why she's passed out. And they said, we have to take her to I live a block from Cooper Hospital. They said, we'll take her to the hospital because that's what we do. And they were very gentle with her and they saw her name on the pill bottle and all that, and got her into, and as they were literally getting her into the ambulance, a guy pulled up in I think it was a Mercedes, it was some real fancy car. And he went out and looked at the statue and he comes back to me. He said, you live here? I said, yeah. And he said, what about that statue? He said, I grew up in this parish and I've just happened to be passing through and I'm checking things out. That statue should be repaired. And I'm thinking, I didn't say it, but I thought, did you just see the real human being, not a stone statue that was being loaded into the ambulance here? That's kind of our concern here right now, pal. He didn't offer to pay for it either, by the way, I might add. It's like, well, sell your damn Mercedes and get us a new statue if you feel that strongly about it. So anyhow, last year, in July of 24, um, this guy, Stephen, who occasionally would come to the door for a cup of coffee. And a real sweet, gentle soul. And every time he comes, he tells you the same thing. I grew up in this parish. I was an altar boy back in the day. He said, "Agnus Dei," and then he can tell you all the Latin responses that he had to learn as an altar boy. And anyhow, he came for a cup of coffee this one day, and he was holding a hydrangea flower. And I said, I said, "Why, Stephen, are you holding a hydrangea or a flower today?" He said, "I want to bring it to the Blessed Mother." I said, "Okay, you go right back there and sit, and I'll bring her coffee and peanut butter and jelly sandwich." I'm famous for my peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, by the way. One homeless guy tells me, "You make the best peanut butter and jelly sandwiches." He said, "You should open a restaurant." So I have a name for it. Brother Mickey's PB&J's. The big J stands for Jesus, right? But anyhow, so I said, "Stephen, go back out. I'll bring everything out to you." And I did. And he was sitting on the bench. And I had brought my sketchbook. I said, "Do you mind if I sketch it?" Well, he said, "No, go ahead." And so you can see he's holding his sandwich in his hand and the coffee cup sitting there on the bench. And the flower he had was at the foot of the statue. And I noticed as I'm sketching, he had this big, ugly mark on his face. I said, "Oh, Stephen, what's that on your face?" And he said, "Oh, they just told me I have cancer." And I said, "Oh," and that's why he wanted to visit the Blessed Mother. I said, what can they do for it?" He said, "I don't know. They don't seem to know yet." And it just broke my heart in the moment. And I thought, what does a homeless person do when they get cancer? Where do they go? What kind of help can they get, you know? I haven't seen him since. That was last July. I don't know how he's made out or where he is now. But that's all of humanity. You know, that's... you don't know where to go with that, except I can go, all I can do is all I can do. But my dearest friend is Carlos, the guy in the middle, who came one day for a cup of coffee. A couple of years ago, I was the only one home, and as he was walking away, I noticed a sketchbook sticking up out of his backpack. And this is how I know the Holy Spirit was at work, because nobody else would have noticed the sketchbook. You know, one of the other guys answered the door. And I said, "Is that a sketchbook?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "Are you an artist?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "I am too." I said, "I don't have time to look now." I said, "But can you come back tomorrow and show me your sketch?" He said, "Sure." And sure enough, he did. Brought a sketchbook back. Beautiful shaded pencil drawings, the kind I used to love to do, where you could just get meditative, you know, all the shading and the rubbing and erasing. And he was a natural with it. Now, I love to tell you this. Subject matter was a big marijuana leaf growing out of a woman's butt, but who am I to judge the subject matter? I was more the technique and the style. And I said, "These are amazing." And so the next week I gave him a bunch of art supplies of mine that I hadn't used in a long time and put them in a, what do you call it, backpack, but it had wheels on it. You would have thought I gave him $1 million. And a week later, I said, "Oh, where's your art stuff?" And he said it was stolen. And Stephen had told me the same thing that very day with the Blessed Mother statue. He said, "Do you have sneakers in there?" I said, "No, I don't today." And I said, "Why, what happened to you?" He said, "Somebody stole them during the night." He said, "I was sleeping on the sidewalk and somebody stole my sneakers." And he said, "It didn't used to be like that." He said, "Back then, homeless people, we all looked out for each other and helped each other, but that's not how it is anymore." And I thought, even the homeless world is rotten, you know? So anyhow, back to Carlos. So we've become very, very close friends. And I took him to the Philadelphia Art Museum one day on the right. He became a different person. He's very smart, very talented. He can do anything. He cuts my hair now. He said, "Oh, I used to work as a barber until I found out I didn't have a license." So he couldn't keep the job as a barber. He's done all kinds of stuff in his day. And on the left side, I took him to what was the Barnes Foundation. I don't know if it was a world famous museum that St. Joe's University now owns. But he stood there like that. And he said, "Oh, could you take a picture of me like this?" You know, he went to show his mother. He's 51 years old. And it's just delights me, this creative spirit and energy. But it breaks my heart that where to go with it. I don't know. All I can do is be there for it. But I don't have the other gifts. So he loves to, once in a while, he said, can I come to the studio with you? And he sits in the chair and does his thing. He said, you won't even know I'm there. And it's true. And I totally get it. That's why I think the Holy Spirit sent him to me. I understand that need to have, my studio is my favorite place in the whole world to be. The second favorite is now Father Steve's sitting room. I told him this morning. Well, I said, this is the kind of place, if I had a room like this, I'd never leave it at home. But in any event, and that's how the studio is. And I'm happy I can provide him a space to exercise his creative self, his prayerful self, in a way that nobody else gets, you know? So anyhow, that's him sitting in the chair in my studio. On the left is a quote from Richard Rohr. It says, God is nothing if not endless creativity and imagination. And that picture of the dock figure, you know, from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, that came from the guy, Mike, the first guy I showed you, the one with the snot and the, you know, I just need somebody to talk to. One day after he finished talking, I looked on his backpack, he had that figurine clipped to it. I said, is that Doc? He said, yeah, he was always my favorite dwarf. He said, don't you love him? And I said, oh, sure. I hadn't really thought about it, but I said, sure. And he took it off and he said, yeah, I'd like you to have it as a gift. And he gave me, clipped it and gave it to me. And I put it on the railing of the porch where I pray every morning. And to me, it's like a religious icon now. I see him and it makes me think of Mike, and I don't know, it's just, we're all in this together. So that's why I made sure it was in the picture when I heard the Richard Rohr quote. And these are two drawings. The two drawings are pencil drawings that Carlos has done. Then he can sit there for hours and go into his quiet zone again, which I get. And the one in the middle, one morning I came down and he said, oh, here, I made this for you. It's a crucifix. This is my painting of it, but the actual thing is, he took his belt and cut it with a razor to create the corpus. It's a leather belt. And then he found twine and tied it to two sticks for the cross. And it's the most precious crucifix I've ever seen, you know? And he had it propped on my dashboard. And I thought, but that is beautiful. And it's heartbreaking, you know, and it's only going to get worse as time goes on. What's the latest thing our dear president said? To round up homeless people. He wants to have mental institutions to get the homeless off the streets. So there's 1 million Carloses out there in this country. That's why being here today and being at No Kings rallies are so important. You know, it's all we can do, right? And hear each other's stories. So when my parents, I don't have time to get into these at all, but this is the spot where I had my novitiate 50 years ago. And I've always loved it. It's a beautiful property. I go down there regularly now. It's in Maryland, right over from the line from Delaware, Wilmington, a town called Childs, which is next to Elkton, if you've ever heard of Elkton. But when my mom died, I used to teach. I taught art and art history at DeSales University for 11 years. And the year I turned 30 is the year she died. And it's also the year I started noticing, I don't know how much longer I can do this. You know, I was just starting to get hints that this is not what I want to do with my life. Because every September the kids came back and they were still 19. And I'm so done with it. And my favorite students over the years were what we call non-traditional students, which was middle-aged women who were back in school to get their college degrees and taking art classes that they loved. I've always wanted to learn how to do this, and sometimes it was same stories. You know, I got married right out of college and I never learned, and they were doing these incredible drawings. And I remember one morning I was running into one in the parking lot and she said, oh, I can't wait to show you my homework. I was like, you did your homework? You know, and didn't complain, you know, when the kids went, oh, how come I only got a D in this drawing? And, you know, all that stuff, who needs it, right? Life's too short. But it's those women, grown adult women students who were struggling. She said, it's so, I remember one told me, I love coming to art class after my statistics class. A lot of them were nursing students. And, you know, she said, it's such a relaxing thing. And that's when I started putting two and two together, that what I need to do with art is not grade students' papers. It's show other people how to use art as a tool for prayerful relaxation and meditation and drawing. So that's where I am today, right? But that was early 90s. And what led me to that was going on retreats down to this favorite spot where I just spent hours drawing the land, the property. And so last year, I brought Carlos down there. He flipped out. He said, this is my dream place to live. You know, he hates Camden and all that. So I took him in this spot. I told him how special that very spot was, and he posed in it. And I did this drawing back at that first time, and it's a quote from Richard Rohr: suffering opens the channel through which all of life flows and by which all of creation breathes. It is somehow beautiful, even if it is a sad and tragic beauty. And that's what we do with our suffering. And everybody that I'm looking at today, it has known grief in some way, and loss and brokenness and fear and trauma. And guess what? We're all here together today to share that with each other. Even if you don't do it with words, you do it with a kind gesture, a smile, a hug. You know, they sometimes say a lot more than all the words and all the words that we think we pressure ourselves to put together. It's kind of like you hug someone in grief, and I know, I don't know what your exact feeling is, but we've all been there, and we can be sensitive to each other that way. And that's what that quote is to me. Mark Foley, I love his writings. He's a therapist, a Jungian therapist, and he's written several beautiful books on Saint Therese of Lisieux from a therapist, because she had a lot of psychological trauma as a kid, which led her to become like a very mature adult, young adult. But anyhow, this is one of the quotes in his book on her. He said, "Love is a fearful thing because it threatens to change our lives and rob us of what we cling to." And often that means we even cling to negative stuff because we want to ignore it, and that things negative and trauma don't get ignored. They don't go away unless we address them. And that's why I feel my talks is to share the uncomfortable parts of our history as a church, because we can't heal it and move forward. But I end up sharing in my talks a lot of stuff that I never learned in church history classes, the horrible issues around slavery and anti-Semitism and that are such a part of our history. And now in today's world, gay people and women being, it's like who's the people today that we're victimizing? So when Carlos had a serious foot injury last year and out of surgery, I did this picture of him as a prayer to Saint Therese. She's pushing his wheelchair. So back in June, this is just this past year, he was in a rehab center after getting surgery, and it was a real serious injury. And I was so thrilled he was there, as was he. And they said, you're gonna be in here at least a month. And he was getting therapy every day and 3 meals and nice treatment. And one day the social worker of the center came in and he said, "Oh, you have to go out on Thursday because your insurance won't cover this anymore." So that Thursday, they put a homeless person in a wheelchair out on the streets. And we know where that started, in Washington. That's exactly all the new stuff, barring people from Medicaid and insurance and everything else. So that's what I see every day. That's why it's nice to be up here. Little break from that. And Saint Therese wrote this in a letter to somebody: "I shall teach you, little brother of my soul, how you must sail the stormy sea of the world." And I just thought, oh, that's me. She was writing that to me personally, little brother of my soul. But who she really wrote it to was a young guy named Maurice, who was discerning whether he was in the seminary, and he didn't know whether to continue in the seminary or go out and get married or run off somewhere else and be a missionary. He just was so conflicted and having a lot of trauma about it. And he wrote to the superior of St. Therese's monastery. And he said, "Could you ask one of the sisters to write me letters once in a while of encouragement?" So she said, sure. So she asked St. Therese to kind of take up this cause. She was already diagnosed with TB at that point, but not at the final stages yet. But in any event, so they start writing letters back and forth to each other and grew to love each other very much. They never met in person. But at one point she wrote to him, she said, "I only had 4 sisters growing up." She said, "I never had a brother." She said, "I'd love if you would one mind, I think of you as my brother. And he wrote back and he said, I'd love it. And he said, I was an only child growing up, so I'd love having a sister. So that's how they addressed each other, my dear brother and my dear sister, in the letters. And she was getting sicker and sicker. And she would write in her letters, my dear brother, she said, this may be my final letter to you. She said, because I'm dying of tuberculosis. And she said, but the little thief hasn't got me yet. That's what she used to call Jesus, the little thief, because he said, I will come like a thief in the night. You don't know the day or the hour. And every night when the sisters would get her to bed, she'd say, the little thief may come for me tonight. So good night. And the next morning she was, you didn't get me yet. I'm still here, you know. So that's how she wrote that to Maurice. She said, that, you know, the little thief may come for me. This may be my last letter. In his last letter to her, he wrote, my dear sister. He said, I did something horrible this weekend that I'm very, very ashamed of. And he said, I'm groveling at Christ's feet for mercy. And he said, I beg you, if you meet Jesus soon, he said, please, your hand over his mouth so he can't tell you what I did. And she wrote back, and my dear brother, I'm saddened that you haven't grown to know me well after all. She said, I don't care what you did. I would never think less of you even if I knew what you did. I don't know. I don't care. That's where we differ, because I'm dying to know what he did that made him so guilt-ridden. But anyhow, she said, don't grovel at Christ's feet for mercy. She said, stand up. His arms are wide open, waiting to embrace you. And that's the real Jesus. That's why she's the most popular saint of the 20th century. She got it. She wasn't into all the clerical laws and rules and regulations. She knew a different Jesus. In her day, even women in their own monastery were not allowed beyond the altar rail. That was the priest celebrant's domain. The only reason they could go in there is if they were the sacristan on duty, and they had to get the linens to wash and clean out the chalices and all that stuff. So she loved it when she was on sacristy duty, because they said what she used to do was go in and knock on the tabernacle door and say, hello, you in there today? How's it going in there? And so she has this relationship with Christ, as all the great mystics of either sex. It was to bring Jesus down to us in our hearts, not keep him as some, you know, up there in heaven, some remote thing that you can only get to by obeying the rules, you know? That's so old-fashioned. So knock it off with you and your rule stuff. So, I didn't mean to get into all that. Saint Thomas Merton wrote this famously. I'm sure you've all heard it. In Louisville, on the corner of 4th and Walnut, in the center of the shopping district, I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all these people, that they were mine and I was theirs, that we could not be alien to one another, even though we were total strangers. I have the immense joy of being human, a member of the race in which God himself became incarnate, as if the sorrows and stupidities of the human condition could overwhelm me, now that I realize what we all are. If only everybody could realize this. There's no way of telling people that they are all walking around shining like the sun. That's probably the most famous passage. I'm sure you've all heard it, right, from his writings, from the book Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander. He had go into town for, I think it was a doctor's appointment or something, first day out of the monastery, right? And that was his experience, to see God everywhere and in all people. He was silenced by the Trappists for a while. He wasn't allowed to write or publish because he was too close in thinking to Martin Luther King. And he and Dorothy Day had a letter correspondence back and forth, and he was very big on civil rights, celebrating civil and anti-Vietnam War. And so they just said, keep quiet, at least one habit. When he went out of office, a new one came in, he was writing again. But anyhow, so a couple of years ago, I was at a religious formation conference in Louisville, and I went for two reasons. One, I wanted to see the street, and two, I wanted bourbon. In Kentucky, of course, you have to have bourbon. But that street is now named Thomas Merton Square, and there's a historical marker there, as you can see on the left. And look at this street further up. The other corner is Muhammad Ali Square. I guess he was from Louisville. And but it's all lit up now, and the restaurants and pubs and whatnot. And then we come to this group of college kids. It was Halloween time, and they were out on this thirsty peddler drinking beer on this bicycle kind of style carriage. And I thought, I bet Thomas Merritt would love this, you know, just seeing just kids being themselves. St. John Chrysostom said, if you cannot find Christ in the beggar at the church door, you will not find him in the chalice. And on the right, Pope Francis, sometimes I think that Jesus is knocking from the inside to let him out. Isn't that great? Therese said, we too are bread that Jesus comes to change into himself. And on the right, she said, it's not to remain in a golden ciborium that he comes to us from heaven. It's to find a heaven more dear to him, the heaven of our soul. Nobody, male or female, was thinking like that, let alone a 24-year-old girl that nobody ever heard of till long after she, not long, till after she died. So we're coming up on a break here, but have you heard of kintsugi? It's a Japanese art form. And it started in the 1400s when an emperor who had a very precious, priceless piece of pottery, and he dropped it, or it was dropped somehow, and broke into many pieces. And he felt as shattered as the object. And he reached out to I think a Shinto priest, somebody, can we do something here? And he put it back together again using gold filler. And it became an art form that to this day, it's about the beauty of repairing ourselves, our broken bits, putting them back together and making them better. And look at those beautiful bowls. They all look nicer now than they probably did when they were whole. You know, they're more beautiful the way they're put together. It says you are all more beautiful, having put your broken pieces together again, or maybe you're still in the process of doing it. But this is art forms like this that give us. And you're not allowed to purposely break the bowl just for the sake of making it. It has to be pre-broken bowls. And I just learned this one earlier this summer. Franz Kempe. Now, there was a couple great art collectors in Hungary, a husband and wife couple, and they collect art, and they came across at an auction this violin. And they got it because they said it was clearly made by a master violin maker, but the materials were really crappy. But they got it anyhow. And they took it to a violin expert, a builder expert. And he said, I can't believe this. He said, I know this was made by a master violin maker. He said, but I cannot figure out why he would have used such awful materials. He said, do I have your permission to take it apart? And they said, sure. And they took it apart, and inside was a crumpled up note written by Franz Kempe, who was a violin maker in Auschwitz. And he had, just as a way, he secretly made, wrote that in this note, that he had secretly made this violin from the crappy wood he was able to salvage in Auschwitz in the barracks. And he survived the war, died in the 1950s, but that's how this thing started moving around. And so I just love that even there in Auschwitz, the gates of hell, there's somebody creating beauty out of what little scraps they could, you know, and how that can speak to us today. And what a wonderful story that is, touches our hearts and souls. So at the beginning of the pandemic, everything shut down. Remember, it started March 17th, I think, 2020. And in June, people were just kind of starting to maybe go out a little bit anyhow. I had a visit from my friend Teresa, who at that time lived in Princeton. And she is a master gardener. And she came to visit, and she's bringing me this pot with a beautiful plant in it. And she said, here, I'm bringing you a gift. I said, what are you giving me a plant for? I said, I'm awful with plants. It turns out they need water. Who knew? You know, I always forget to water them or would do whatever you're supposed to do. And she said, well, you better take care of this one because it's from a cutting that Albert Einstein planted when he lived in Princeton. He was a gardener. And they say there's generations of these begonias that have come down through a plant that he did when he was there. And I was like, panic. I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? So I put it on my prayer table on the screened-in porch that you just saw with Doc from Snow Whites, and I named him Albert. And I started researching begonias, and there's symbols of connection between people, individuality and uniqueness, and harmonious communication. And that they said that, and when I Googled it, that they're often plants that friends give to each other. So I thought, I guess I was meant to have this begonia. So I started monitoring its growth, just like a parent does, when they mark the wall with the kids growing up. And I thought, oh, look at this, August 6th, I remember coming down in the morning and there was pink blossoms. I didn't know I was supposed to expect them. I have what's called an angel's wing begonia. Anybody plant people in here? You might know all this stuff already, but the wings are, the leaves are shaped like big wings. And so then look at the September 4th, there was even more pink flowers, September 12th, October 3rd. I was just having a good old time painting it. And October 15th, and then February, we made it into winter, and there was this beautiful plant. And meanwhile, I'm getting more and more interested in Albert Einstein. I'd always heard of the theory of relativity, but so over my head, what do I know? But I saw this quote of his. He said, "Life is a great tapestry. The individual is only an insignificant thread in an immense and miraculous pattern." I thought, how beautiful is that? Because I have a lot of weaver friends, and so the thread thing. He said, "Science without religion is lame, and religion without science is blind." And on the right, the most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. And I thought, I'm starting to like Albert Einstein more and more. I never knew any of this. And meanwhile, do any of you follow the James Webb Telescope pictures that are coming back to Earth? That thing is like a gazillion light years from Earth, and it sends pictures back. And they're pictures of things that happened many, many, many eons ago, because it takes that long for light to travel to Earth. So we're seeing the birth of stars and black holes, and their science is renaming stuff. It's kind of like, it's confirming. And one of the things that's confirmed, just last year, they said the scientific community around the world, because of the pictures that are coming back to Earth, confirm for a fact that Albert Einstein was right with the theory of relativity. And I remember when I first got my plan, I looked up theory of relativity. First thing that came up, it said theory of relativity explained for children. I thought, well, that's the one for me. I didn't even understand that one, to be perfectly honest. So I still don't get it now, but I know it's a big deal. But this is the pictures. These are real pictures. It looks like Star Wars sets or backdrops. This is, I forget what this one is, but it's the creation of some kind of gas or something. Look at these. And how many things are spiral shaped? Do you know how much in art spirals are recurring? Look at Irish art, the Celtic spirals, knots, Greece, or any country that's on an ocean or an island usually has spirals in their motif, and that's maybe where the roots are. We all have cosmic dust. They said that after 9/11, going through the remains, that we all have the touches of stardust in our DNA and systems. So I thought, Albert Einstein, you're my new hero, even though I don't get it. But I did learn that I am like him in ways that I never knew before. Get up in the morning, I look in the mirror, I thought, oh my God, I have Albert Einstein hair. So for 3 days running, I took those pictures. And then this is his office, and I could relate to that too. Problems cannot be solved by the same level of thinking that created them. So March 11th, it's starting to get droopy. And then Good Friday of 2021, it was gone. It all drooped all the way over. I took it to a local plant store, garden shop. And I took a picture of it and showed it to a woman behind the counter. And I said, I have this begonia at home. Can you tell me what I should do? And she looked at it and she went, I felt like the doctor's just getting my fatal... And she said, well, begonias are tricky. She said, I have a couple at home. She said, I suggest, where do you have it? And put it back on the windowsill and blah, blah, blah. So I did all that, but by Good Friday, it was done. So I did a farewell painting of Albert. And I thought, well, I guess I'm being told to let go, learn to move on and let go. but I still continued my interest in Albert. And he was, of course, a Jewish refugee, one of the most brilliant minds of his time, highly recognized at the University of Berlin, where he taught. And he'd gotten the Nobel Peace Prize, all that, not Peace Prize, a Science Prize. But Hitler comes to power and all Jews lost their jobs. And it was no longer safe for him to be in Germany. So he came to the United States on a lecture tour, and that's how he landed at Princeton. He loved Princeton. And this is him and his daughter and his secretary taking the oath as citizens in 1940. So we weren't real gracious to immigrants back then. I don't know if you knew how many people filled in the 1930s here in the United States, how many people loved Hitler and what he was doing for the Jews. If you ever see the Ken Burns documentary on PBS, look it up. It's gross, but it shows Madison Square Garden, sold out crowd, tens of thousands of people standing there like this, people of all ages, backgrounds, and up on the stage is this huge picture of George Washington. So they're trying to say how American it is to, and this was very, very common as a ship of Jewish refugees was turned away, and they were sent back. Every one of them died in a concentration camp because the United States wouldn't take them in. There was so much anti-Jewish sentiment here in the country. I never learned that before, you know. I never learned that German soldiers were treated better than Black American soldiers, German prisoners of war, you know. The American Colored Nurses Association wanted to be part of the overall national nursing situation, and they wouldn't let them in because they were colored. So World War II comes along. President Roosevelt said, we are in desperate need of nurses on the front lines in Europe to tend to our soldiers over there. And so the Colored Nurses Association said, we would love to go and help. So they said, all right, they needed 13,000 nurses. And they said, we'll take 300 colored nurses. But they weren't allowed to go to Europe because they said that a lot of white soldiers might not want to be treated by Black women. So they were sent instead to one of the 200 prisoner of war camps that were here in the United States. I knew we had them. I didn't know there were that many, 200. So that's where the colored nurses were sent to work. And some of them were Arkansas, all the southern states. And they weren't allowed to eat in the main dining hall with the white American soldiers. But the German prisoners of war were eating in the dining hall with the American soldiers. But the colored nurses had to have a separate, they were never allowed to go to the doctor's meetings once a week, you know, to review patients' histories and needs. They were excluded from that. And they said the German soldiers were in pretty good health. They weren't that desperately needed. But that's not what we learn in our history books. And I'm not saying that make America great again. You know, that sure D-Day happened and all that, but the Black soldiers were excluded from all of it. So who do I love more than anybody? The Black soldiers, the Tuskegee Airmen who rose above that stuff. The colored nurses who remained nurses and said, I still want to help the Army as best I can, even though you're not going to let me go, you know, and we're not that far from there. I love to point out in Germany, in the 1930s, 96% of the population claimed to be identified as practicing Christian. 96%. 40% of that were Catholic. So when you see the film of Hitler going through the streets and the whole town coming out and doing this, and you just think, okay, 96% of you are Christians and 40% of that are Catholics. That's scary. And we never learned that stuff before. And look at us today, you know? So when you have a sense of religion as just obey the rule, don't ask questions, don't have a mind of your own, that's when we get ourselves in trouble. And that's why we keep repeating history over and over and over again. We've done it for thousands of years because we don't learn from the past. So one of the first things Einstein did was started visiting the historically Black colleges and universities. He got an honorary doctorate. I love that picture there. Look at all those, they were science and physics majors. And they're all dressed up in suits and ties. And I thought, what bravery that these guys would go in to study this, knowing they're not going to get a job like everybody else, you know? But that didn't keep them back. That's the courage. And that's what Einstein was teaching them. He said the taboo, the let's not talk about it, must be broken. The exclusion of a large part of the colored population from civil rights is a slap in the face of the Constitution. And I won't read this because we are getting close on time, but he was just saying there how Americans are, you know, we're going against our own thought. The modern prejudice against Negroes is the result of the desire to maintain an unworthy condition. Now, this is the quote that grabbed me about Pope Pius XII. Only the church stood squarely across the path of Hitler's campaign to suppress the truth. I never had any special interest in the church before, but now I feel a great affection and admiration because the church alone has had the courage and persistence to stand for intellectual truth and moral freedom. I am forced thus to confess that what I once despised, I now praise unreservedly. Albert Einstein said that in 1940. I'd always learned that everybody hated Pius XII because he didn't do anything publicly. But we now know that archives are opened, that there was a whole lot behind the scenes that he did, including in Assisi. If you ever go to Assisi, the most beautiful town in all of Italy, you'll see the Museum of Memory. And Pope Pius XII reached out to the Archbishop of Assisi up there on the upper left, that guy, and said, we have to do something, do everything you can to help Jews. He said, because this is against Catholic social teaching. So he set up a whole network with the Franciscans there to hide Jews. 300 Jews were saved during World War II and hidden in Assisi. Not one was taken prisoner or captured or died. One woman died, but she died of a heart attack. Natural causes, not. They had all been given false identity cards that were delivered to them by a man named Gino Bartoli, who was a world-renowned bicyclist. Everybody in Europe knew he was like the greatest athlete in Italy, and he was world-renowned. What's the big bike? Tour de France, he had won that and all that. So anyhow, even the Germans respected him. So he was part of this whole thing. He used to hide identity cards and things in the bicycle seat and in the handlebars. And the Germans would always, oh, you're Gino, you can go wherever you want. So he would go from Rome up to Assisi and to help people. And they had a printing press where they'd create false cards for everybody. The convent of nuns there hid whole Jewish families in their convent, Franciscan sisters, and they even cooked their ritual food for them on Jewish holy days when they could, you know, so they were really respected them. And so, and the guy above is Colonel Mueller. He was the Gestapo or the SS commandant in Assisi. And turns out after the war, they found out he was Catholic and knew all this was going on, but didn't say a word. He didn't stop it. He didn't turn them in. So he's held up as a national hero now. So if you ever get to Assisi, make sure you go to that museum because they have the printing press, all kinds of information. Little chapel of St. Therese, it's all right there. Pope John the 23rd, he helped many Jews escape. He was a bishop during World War II, and he forged, some people think it may have been as many as 10,000 Jewish lives were saved from him because he forged baptismal certificates for them to help them escape from Europe. So what they said when they were first showing the first newsreel footage coming out of Auschwitz, the people that were with him, they said he just turned pale as a sheet, and he said, we all knew this was happening, but now we have proof that it really did happen. It was not a hoax or a woke hoax, you know, that this really did happen. So that's him with Jesus as a concentration camp inmate. So anyhow, all that to get back to Albert Einstein. The other thing I learned was he was a master violinist. He had a collection. I never knew this before. He once said, the most joy in life has come from my violin. If I were not a physicist, I'd probably be a musician. I often think in music. I live my dreams in music. I see my life in terms of music. And he had a collection of 13 very expensive and historically important violins that the Nazis stole from him. And One of them just went up for auction, was sold for almost £1 million, 800,000 pounds or something like that. But yeah, I never knew that. And his wife said that when he was working on the theory of relativity, he was secluded in his room for 2 weeks. She said she used to leave dinner for him at the door, and he'd eat it, and she never saw him. Finally, he burst out of the room, and he said, I just came up with a theory. He said, I think it's going to be pretty important. And she said he went right there to the piano and played the piano to unwind from it. So music was a big deal, which made it a big deal when Marian Anderson, renowned opera singer from Philly, she was a Philly girl, who when she was 18 years old went to the local music school in downtown Philly to take singing lessons, and they made her sit there all day. She said other kids were coming and going, signing up for piano and conducting all kinds of stuff, voice. And finally, the receptionist was ready to shut down for the day. She said, can I help you? And she said, yes, I'd like to take music lessons. And the woman said to her, we don't give classes to N-words. So she went somewhere else and became the world's leading opera singer. And she said, I know I can't have a career here in the United States. So she went to Europe. She was the toast of Europe for 10 years, all over. Everybody knew Marian Anderson's music. Well, Hitler comes to power. She's not Aryan enough. So she comes home thinking, my career's over. Nobody's going to hire me to sing. And so she comes back, and she was scheduled to have a concert in Princeton, not at the university, but at the local auditorium. And the local hotel wouldn't put her up because she was black. So Albert Einstein was horrified, and he welcomed her into his home. And this is a picture of right in his living room. He played the violin, and she sang. But they had their own little, and they became close friends. I put my begonia on the coffee table, you can see there. So I thought that's where it was. And they both love cats. And he once said, the only escape from the miseries of life are music and cats. So she once said, when I sing, I want people to see my soul, and that's colorless, because they were making a fuss about her being black and all that. She said, when you stop having dreams and ideals, you might as well stop altogether. So that was 37 when they met. In 1939, she was scheduled to sing at Constitution Hall. You all know this story, in Washington, D.C., which was owned by the Daughters of the American Revolution, and the stuffiest group of old bats you ever want to see in your life. When you see the pictures like that. And they said, she can't sing here because we don't have a bathroom for the colored. This was Washington, D.C., so it abided by all the Southern laws. Eleanor Roosevelt heard about this and was outraged. And she said, you're going to sing in Washington. And she arranged for his concert on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. And Marian Anderson didn't want to do it. She was a nervous wreck, number one, but she, to be in the spotlights and she felt like she was being exploited for civil rights cause. But she finally relented. She had to do it. So that picture here is of her. You can see her on the left. 75,000 people came that day to hear her sing. And she said later she was terrified. She was like shaking. How am I going to? And the guy playing the piano, and it was the first time in Washington that they let the crowd mingle. So up until then, if they were outdoor, the blacks had to go to the back. But now they were allowed to stand side by side. And they listened to Marian sing. She sang the national anthem and My Country, 'Tis of Thee, and other spirituals. Well, it was broadcast on the radio, and millions of people listened to it around the country, including a young teenage boy in Atlanta, Georgia, named Martin Luther King. And he said she changed his life. He credits her with being one of the founders of the civil rights movement. And so that's her. Oh, and this next one, she's singing at the inauguration of President Kennedy. He invited her to sing the national anthem. And you can see her hard to see in that picture, but there, and then Jackie Kennedy's over there on the left. And when he came up with the idea of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, she was one of the first people to receive that, because he said she's an important figure, cultural figure. And then after his death is when the Kennedy Center, the Trump Center, excuse me, was being built. And four people a year have been given. She was in the first group to be given the Kennedy Center honors. So Yeah, I get chills, see. But again, in both cases, Einstein inherits beauty, music, art, culture, creativity that saved them. So last year, I was thrilled to go. My dad was a seasonal member of the Philadelphia Orchestra. And so they changed their name to the Marian Anderson Hall, which is the home auditorium of the Philadelphia Orchestra. So they had a wonderful evening. Queen Latifah was the MC, and Audra McDonald came and sang, and it was just beautiful. But here you can see up in the stands. And I was thrilled to be there because it was my dad's favorite place, and plus history being made. And then, so my friend Teresa gave me a new plant. I said, what am I going to call this one? I said, she said, well, you can't call it Birdie. I gave one to my sister and she called hers Birdie for Albert. So I named it Marion. So Marion now, there's to get the pictures of, that's 3 of them. I keep cutting them and giving them to people and replant. In fact, they're really getting too big. I have to put them in bigger pots now. But Albert Einstein said, creativity is contagious, pass it on. And there are 5 health benefits of having houseplants. They're soothing, they sharpen our attention, they may speed up healing, they can boost happiness, and they brighten up indoor life. So everybody go home and get houseplants. And here's the picture of Albert Einstein's violin that he hid from the Nazis that they finally got, but it sold for 860,000 pounds at auction just this past October. Logic will get you from A to B. Imagination will take you everywhere. Einstein. And I love solitude is painful when one is young, but delightful when one is more mature. And I know you all need a break, but here's Einstein's rules for a better life. 1, expand your efforts on the things that matter, which you're all doing, being part of Pax Christi. Do things you love, even if you're terrible at them. Have puzzle mindset. I am addicted to Sudoku puzzles, and it does help me relax. Think deeply about things that truly fascinate you. Don't let politics fill you with rage or despair. Blind obedience to authority is the greatest enemy of the truth. And lastly, science, truth, and education are for everyone, not just the privileged few. And we're getting away from that one now too, aren't we? Okay, we're going to end here, but here's civil rights marches. Representative John Lewis said, never be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble. And who were some of the first people to show up? Sisters, religious sisters came from all over. And look at that, Sister St. Joseph with the National Guardsmen standing over. Now we have National Guardsmen in our cities again. See you, Bowman, and we're going to look at her after our break. It doesn't matter if you're scared, just keep on stepping. And this was the Bishop of Alabama. The whole state was one diocese. And he called the heads of women's religious communities and said, if any of your nuns come down here to march, you just tell them to get on the fastest train out of the state because they're not welcome. The bishop. Meanwhile, the Bishop of Mississippi told priests, if you do not integrate your parishes, you'll be excommunicated. So it just showed the conflict right within the institutional church. So Pope Francis said, if we look at the history of the church, we see that every time the bishops did not act like shepherds when dealing with a problem, they aligned themselves with political life on political problems. So on that note, why don't we take how long a break? I had this shortened down to 4 hours, so don't. Oh, here you go. Right?
Hello? Yeah.
There.
Okay. I will be quick. Terribly, terribly moved by this incredible presentation. Two things, well, a couple of things. You all got your slip of paper about the wearing a paper clip based on activity in Norway during World War II. The sign of resistance to what's going on. And when I read about it, I realized how alike today's conditions are. And so I wrote up a little bit, something, a little background of it. So just take a look at your paper and wear your paper clip, okay? That's just sort of an aside. We want to get a picture and of everyone together to show our connection with what's going on all over the country. I saw a map this morning of all of the No Kings gatherings, and it practically covers densely the whole United States. So I know that a lot of people who would be here are there, but we are there in spirit. I'd love to have a background photo. Yeah, but I'd like to have a background photo. Can you put the picture of Franz as a Franz, yes, the violin guy. That will go with
No, it wasn't.
I just figure.
It's only gonna take a second. You know, don't be opposition. Well, hey, listen, you know, if you don't want to be in the picture, go take your break, all right? My ex-friend, Kevin McGrath, you know. Well, I'm just trying to do what Pat wants.
Come on, stand.
They turned my
You don't.
program, yeah. And you use that.
Some both, in on the city,
Well,
Yeah.
we're gonna need 2 rows of.
do we have to move it?
No, you don't have.
Did some folks? Stand.
No, stand in pavilion. And-
Right.
I'll go up in the back.
With the tall people. Hey, Barbara, you, so good to see you. Yeah, that's what I think. Yeah, yeah, I hope Jim is.
Gotta move in this way. Sir.
Gotta get caught.
Yeah.
See you.
I can envision it here. If it is.
You need the wide lens.
It's a good thing it's not a bigger pool.
Perfectly. You can't see that.
Okay.
So, the wind, get his hat, okay? Get in.
Room right here.
Right here. Just right here.
Molly, come.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, get in.
Anybody else?
Crowd.
Oh, wait, I wanted that Puck's Christi sign. Wait,
Wait a minute.
Hang on.
oh, make sure the words are.
Oh, we getting ready? Up, sir, come on in. Hurry up.
Squeeze, we're friendly.
Okay. We're gonna take a few of these, okay, so.
That could be linked to the.
Everybody see.
Try vegan cheese.
No kicking.
No gone.
Bill, wait,
I could-
Bill, wait. I just want to take one with the other banner. Where's that?
Look behind.
Where's the other one?
I don't.
Because they may be appropriate for different audiences.
What it is.
I'm sorry, but thank you so much for cooperating.
Good.
We're grateful.
Suzanne, we lost Suzanne. She had to run to the bathroom.
Okay.
Wheezy.
You don't want people on the mark.
Right.
And we're doing a few of these. Oh, Vice Christi. Okay.
Okay.
Well,
What was the second one? How was the second one different?
Okay.
Oh.
Did want to mention during break that Brother Mickey will be back at his table selling some of his beautiful artwork. So please feel free to go back and spend. All right.